Welcome back, everybody, to the You Ask, We podcast, the show where you ask the questions, they answer them, and I'm just the guy in the middle. This week, we have an amazing guest. He's a deputy district attorney and veteran criminal prosecutor with experience prosecuting cases from narcotics offenses to gang murders to complex white-collar crime and cybercrime. And on top of that, he's also a professor at USC's School of Engineering, where he teaches cyber and privacy law to undergraduate students. I want to give a warm welcome to Mr. Benny Forer. Benny, how's it going?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's fantastic.
How's the drive here?
Great. Sunday.
Yeah.
Sunday in LA is a great place.
Nice Sunday day. Kind of windy, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty windy.
I grew up in the East Coast. I can handle it.
Yeah, true. So, this first question, normally the questions are all submitted from the people, but the first question always comes from me, and that's what's new?
What's new? It's a hard question. I mean, everything's new. Because I work in cyber, it's always new, right? There's always new stuff. So that's what's new. I mean, in the 2023, I published a book, a textbook for cyber law. And what's new is that I already have to publish a second edition. So that's what's new. So that's where I'm at. I'm working on my second edition already. That should be published this year.
Well, I mean, I feel like when professors make a second edition for a textbook, that means it's going well.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's not a second edition for the sake of like just making a second edition. A second edition for the sake of I had to change chapters around because rulings could come out on the fly on the area of law, and it would change the entire chapter. So I had a chapter on a specific issue, and it's gone now, essentially. So I had to redo the entire chapter.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like every professor says like the law always changes, so it's like everything gets changed.
Some areas, not mens rea and actus reus, right? Criminal law doesn't change in that way. But yes, things do change a lot.
Yeah. So let's get into some of these user submitted questions. This first one comes from Kyle. What led you to pursue a career in law, and more specifically, working at the DA as a criminal prosecutor? Like, what led you to that field?
I mean, I think everybody has their own interesting experiences as it relates to going into certain areas. Many of us are not good at math, and we end up doing soft sciences in college, right? Or soft arts in college, like political science and humanities and things like that. But I think as a kid, I wanted to go become a lawyer. My grandfather, I'm named after, Benjamin Forer was his name. He was a lawyer of renown, and his brother was a lawyer of a lot of renown. He was a constitutional First Amendment attorney who argued many cases in front of the Supreme Court. So despite growing up very orthodox, I always had that as a thing that I wanted to do. So that's kind of what drew me to law later on in life as I started getting older. And in college, what drew me to law was just the opportunity that it would represent in the future. Specifically, DA's is an amazing thing. I had no intention of ever becoming a district attorney. So that wasn't in my cards. I didn't believe I was going to ever do that. When I was in law school, it was not a focal point at all. It just sort of happened. There was like an interview of like I had a friend in law school who was my mentor at Southwestern, and he was a year ahead of me. Always gave me great advice. Truly helped me become a better student. 100%. I owe some of my A's to him. And he called me up. I was already working in civil, and he called me up one day and he said, "Hey, join the public defender's office." He's like, "It's great." He's explaining all these things to me, and he sends me the application. So I applied to the public defender's office because he told me to. Eric, my buddy Eric, who was this great mentor to me, told me to apply. And I applied, and once I sent the application and I sat back, I was like, "No, I don't want to do that." Like, no offense to anybody who does it, but like I was not for me. So I was like, "Hey, let me see if the DA's office has any applications." Now, the way it works is the public defenders have rolling applications. The district attorney's office has applications at the time. They would have like 2 weeks a year would be open. That's it. And lo and behold, it was, in that circumstance that I thought about that during those 2 weeks that happened to be open without any knowledge, not knowing anybody, applied it. I just kept getting called back for interviews. And I said, okay, I kept going. And then when they finally called me to offer me the job, I wasn't even sure I wanted to take the job. But I did because I really wanted to do trials. And it was amazing. And thank God I did. It really worked out wonderfully. So I had no intention. It was totally by mistake. It was on a whim. But once I joined, I was like, yeah, this is where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah, and it's like when you said like you were kind of like interested in law for a while, like representing people, like was it always criminal law or was it like a different type
No,
at
no, no. It
first?
was just the idea of law appealed to
Ah,
me. I liked studying Gemara, for example, Talmud. So I enjoyed the analytics of what law represented without knowing anything really about it. But the idea of law appealed to me. It wasn't specifically any area. But certainly when I was in law school, I had never intention of being a criminal lawyer. I thought I would be big corporate attorney or something like that. But I fell backwards into being a DA. And so I'm poor. Okay.
okay, so yeah, on that, let's just move to the next question. This next one comes from Mary. How do you navigate the transition between prosecuting cases? Like, are there, because you deal with a lot of crimes, like narcotics cases, cyber crimes, things like that. So would you say there's common principles that apply across
Yeah,
those crimes?
that's a really astute question in many ways because one of the things I used to do, I think that made me a good lawyer in the DA's office. I'm self-complimenting, so maybe that's not true, but I think it is true. Me and my friends, when we were young, and it was just a game. We shared an office. I remember being in an office with 3 people. We were jam-packed. No one has their single offices. And you start playing this game after a while where we would take files as we were preparing them for the next day, and we'd try to guess. We knew the crime. Someone would say the penal code section that it was. We would try to guess the factual scenario that led to the crime. And when you started doing that, it was very fascinating to do that. It was just a fun game, but then all of a sudden you realize it was great practice. What ended up happening, you realize, is there's a finite number of ways a crime can occur. Whatever crime that it is. I mean, cyber is not. It's infinite. But certain crimes, your typical robberies, assaults, criminal threats, drug dealing, drug sales, whatever it is, there's only a finite number of ways it can occur. And therefore, there's a finite number of defenses that are available. And when you start figuring that out, it becomes very easy. So it's not hard for me to prosecute those kind of lower level, so to speak, felonies, residential burglary, robberies, assaults, criminal threats. They're not hard to prosecute because I know the finite number of ways. There's a lot of fluff around the edges, and that changes every circumstances. But I do know what the finite number of ways it occurs and the finite number of ways that the defense could defend their case. So in that sense, it's a very astute question because there isn't a necessity to transition between cases, to switch your brain from one to the other. You're not handling extraordinarily complex situations. It's usually individuals that are complex, not the case. So your victims or your defendants, but not the case itself, not the factual scenario. Not hard to switch between those. In cyber, you do have. So when I was in cybercrime, I had far less cases than I'd handle nowadays in a typical year. Far less because they were complex and required focus and thought and analytical perspective on it. So how do I do that? I don't know. You just figure it out.
You kind of just wing it as you go.
You kind of wing it as you go along. It's all the DA's office. A lot of it is all triage, is what I call it. Like I supervise the preliminary hearing unit in downtown LA. I would be bold to proclaim, but I think it is. It's probably one of the busiest units in the country. I manage, 10, 12 DAs, younger DAs, and 10, 12, more than 12 courtrooms in the biggest building, in the busiest building in the United States or in North America. And so it's just, I consider myself a supervising triage ER doctor, right? It's you just running from place to place, handling various emergencies that are occurring. So there you have to be able to transition very quickly and to also remember those short conversations that you might have had with your attorneys or the defense attorneys in the process. You figure it out. It's experience. That's what it is.
But it's interesting how you say how like with, other crimes like that are not cybercrime related. It's like with other crimes, there's like only a limited amount of ways that it could happen. It's interesting you mentioned that because it's like...
No, it is fascinating when you think about it in that way because like I'll talk to younger DAs about their case. I'm like, I'm in a murder case. Okay, what happened? Okay, so here's your basic factual scenario. Spit it out to me in 5 sentences. And you sit there and go, okay, what's their defense? He didn't do it or he did do it, right? And within he did do it, why did he do it? He did it in self-defense. He did it in defense of others. He did it in imperfect self-defense. But there's only a finite number of ways that it happened. If the defense is he didn't do it, then you don't have to worry about whether the crime occurred. They're going to agree it's a murder. It's just going to say he didn't do it. So there is a finite number of ways that things occur. And once you figure that out, you can sort of go, let's narrow it down and figure out how we approach this. What's the issue we have to approach? What's the idea we have to approach? So yeah, there really is a finite number of ways. Cybercrime gets unwieldy because there's always a new scheme and scam that's occurring. And so it's like, oh my God, how did this happen? What's the breadcrumbs of events that I'd have to track to figure out how this occurred? I do a lecture on the history of cybercrime, when the first trial of cybercrime occurred. And what I discovered in preparing for the lecture and doing the lecture is that law is always responsive to cybercrime. That is to say, cybercrime occurs and then law happens, not vice versa. We can't foresee in many situations. So whereas the other crimes that are historical crimes that every society had these as criminal activities, they've been happening for 5,000 years of humanity. They're still happening.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah.
Let's move to this next question. This next one comes from Emily. Can you share a memorable case from your career that you think had a significant impact on you? I know the DA has rules about anonymity, so it's like if you can't.
No, I don't. No, I can share cases. It's just as I saw that question, I was like, it's hard to answer that question. The reason is because I'm a DA for almost 18 years. I've probably handled in one way or another over 10,000 cases, right? Not trials, but I'm saying you've handled in so many different ways. So when people ask me that question, it's complex because I go, in what context? Meaning say there's context of most violent, most tragic, best results, things like that. So there are different types of cases like that you have memories of, the anecdotal stories that you end up getting out of a certain trials that tend to be a lot of fun. One of my favorite cases I ever did. So one of my favorite trials I ever did was a robbery. We call it an Estes robbery. And an Estes robbery is taking something from someone by force or fear, right? Using a weapon or hitting them and taking something from them, as opposed to a theft. I pick your pocket. I shoplift. Well, sometimes people shoplift and they can turn that shoplifting into a robbery, which becomes a serious crime. That is when, security or management or someone from the store says, hey, please don't steal our item, give it back, and you assault them in the process. Robbery, we know, is incomplete crime until you reach a place of safety. So guy comes into the store, he steals some chips, but it's not complete until he reaches a place of safety. As on his way out, security tries to stop him, and he punches out security. And then it gets into a tussle, etc. That becomes a robbery. So what would have been a petty theft and we wouldn't have prosecuted, or even if we prosecuted, would have been like, hey, don't do that again, also becomes a significant crime. Long story short, there was a whole complex issue that ended up forcing it to go to trial. And one of my favorite moments in trial was cross-examining the defendant. It was a memorable moment because you always realize that you learn little things. The defendant took the stand and he testified that he was just shoplifting and that was it, right? I did a minimal thing. You got me, but like security walked up to me and just beat me up for no reason. I didn't fight. They just beat me up. That was his defense. He had prior convictions for a shooting. He shot 2 cops. So we couldn't introduce that in trial because it would have been too prejudicial to introduce its character evidence. If you learned that in law school, you can't introduce character evidence. And so we sanitize it, we clean it up. And the only thing we get to ask is, have you ever been convicted of a crime of moral turpitude? That's the question that gets asked. There's nothing you can follow up. I can't get into the facts. I can't get into the conviction. I can just show that he's been convicted previously of a crime of moral turpitude, which reflects on his honesty in this present moment. Therefore, the jury should look skeptically towards his testimony. Well, his lawyer obviously asked that question to take the wind out of me asking the question. They don't want me to ask that question. So his lawyer asked the question and says, isn't true you've been convicted of a crime of moral turpitude? And he says, yes, I have. And he says, I have no further questions. And he sits down. I'm sitting there going, I don't know what a crime of moral turpitude is. I don't know if you can define that word. I don't know if any of the viewers can define that word.
Just about to ask.
Yeah, what is that? And so I'm sitting there thinking to myself, there's no way this dude knows, right? There's no way he knows what that word means. But he just answered it. So it was like a spark of moment in that moment. I stood up and I said to him, before I get into the facts of the case, before I examine you about what happened here, I just want to ask you a quick question. What do you think a crime of moral turpitude means? Because you answered yes to your attorney. So do you mind defining it for the jury? And he looks at me and goes, shooting people? And I said, yes, I'll take that. And that was it. He convicted himself in that very moment, right? The jury just gasped. He admitted he shot people. And I didn't ask him the question to deduce that. I asked him the question, can you define it? Because I wanted him to say it means dishonesty, and I would have led from that. But it's like a defining moment for you where you're like shooting people, and you're like, I will definitely take that answer. Let's move on. And then it was like, you're done. You're getting convicted.
Yeah.
At that moment. So there's moments like that in court that happen where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened.
Would you say there's a case in particular like that changed your outlook as a lawyer, as a DA, as a whole? Or
I mean, no. No, I mean, it's because it's a really complex question, because the question is whether it changed me in a negative way, in a positive way, made me more a DA, less a DA, more defensor. And there's many things like that. If you look at the humanity behind some of the cases, there's certainly cases that are tragedies and on both ends, right? Like that you can see that. Right now I have a murder case that's a tragedy, and me and the defendant, the murderer, have met multiple times. We're friendly. She wants to talk to me without her lawyer present, and her lawyer is sort of okay with that. We have a good relationship. I bought her some books to read while she was in custody. So we have this relationship where I'm prosecuting her for murder, but I understand her and I get her, and we also have this relationship. We've talked about life and her experiences in life, and she's a fascinating, intelligent woman who suffered incredible trauma in life. And so I appreciate that. I'm obviously going to try to work out a deal. She's not going to walk away from this case, but it's certainly life altering in that sense, where you have a person that you have a close relationship. You've met many times now in custody and in court, and there's no animosity towards that. She understands what she did. She understands my role. Her lawyer, I understand her role and her lawyer's role. And so we have this sort of relationship that's very fascinating. So those kind of things, you have circumstances that occur to you in the course of your career that are certainly altering your a lot of what you do. I don't know if you knew this or if I mentioned this when we last met, but I did a lot of work in sexual abuse outside of my job in the evenings for many, many years, from like 2009 to 2017. I think 2009, maybe even earlier. I mean, that was traumatic as hell, and that is certainly life altering in many ways. So that those things happen. I don't know that I can say there's particular cases or a particular case. It's many incidences and occurrences that over the course of a career that you experience in different ways, from cases that impact you where you're like, hey, I got this wrong. Not that you pursue a wrong case, but sometimes you have a case that may look like one thing and you find out it's something else. To cases where you're like, this is a vicious, vicious human being that needs to be, put away. Like I've had those cases where you're like, this is a horrible person in every sense of the word. He just has no humanity left in him. So there are those. I think there are those where you're just like, look, you forfeited your rights here. You're just heinous people. So there are those. Those change. I mean, you see some of the cases you see in your career, from the baby killers to the vicious rapists, and those definitely alter you for sure. They're very emotional.
Yeah, it could be a lot. Honestly, I felt that same way, like learning criminal law for the first time, because there were a lot of cases that were like that, and it would be 9 a.m. in the morning, and that's the first thing we're like reading for the day.
That's how my job starts at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, it's heavy.
Yeah, some of it, again, you get jaded a lot. That's the truth. So one of the things that happened to, I think, a lot of DAs and defense attorneys in our system is you become very jaded about crime. We don't realize the impact of crime. Sometimes we're doing a trial and it's sort of like we're cavalier about it because you're like, the guy just did this and that. And you're like, you don't realize the jury's like, holy crap. That's one thing. The other thing that happens a lot of, I think, DAs and defense attorneys, we become very isolated. You don't want to be around a lot of members of society. I think that's a very common thing. Because you suffer some sort of vicarious trauma from the victims you represent or the defendants you represent. You might have trauma from that. So there are circumstances like that are impactful in that way. You're sort of like, most people are just terrible. But that's not the truth, but you kind of get that feeling.
I hear you. So, let's just move to this next question here. This question comes from Rich. How has your experience in prosecuting shaped your approach to each new case? I feel like that could be.
Yeah, that's too hard of a question or too broad of a question. It's a job at the end of the day. I mean, it does define me in many ways, and many DAs are defined by that, but it is a job. And so 99% of your cases are just run-of-the-mill repetitive type of cases. You're seeing a robbery in a store, a robbery at a bus stop. You're seeing a burglary in a home, in a motel, whatever, right? You're seeing a shooting. I mean, they become very just regular run-of-the-mill things. It's the weird murder cases that you get, the strange circumstances you get, the very advanced and complex cyber crimes you get. Those are the sort of things that you sit there and go, wow, I can't believe people thought this up, right? Or I can't believe this circumstance happened. But I don't think it shapes you in any particular way. I think it more, every case gives you, not every case, but cases as you go along give you experience and knowledge and insight into how they're done, how they're prosecuted, how to handle it, how to handle scenarios, how to handle defense attorneys, how to handle judges, how to handle certain motions. So you get that sort of experience as you go along.
Yeah, I feel like pretty much like what you're saying is like the more experience you get, it's kind of like a layup. Like over time, like practice makes perfect.
Yeah. I mean, those lower level cases that I supervise now, again, lower level, they're felonies. Some of them are violent felonies, but they are layups. I don't have to prepare them at all if I wanted to put on a case. I really don't require prep work. I know how they're done. I mean, my younger DAs are prepping and they're reading jury instructions. I know the jury instructions. I know the elements of the offense. It's like, you're right. It's like a layup. It's just, yeah, I got this.
Time.
Yeah.
Fair. Okay. Simple question, simple answer.
Yeah.
This next one comes from Ben, mutual friend of ours. Shout out Ben Harari.
Shout out.
For submitting a question. Who do you think is the best candidate for the next LA District Attorney?
Ben's setting me up. That's an intentional setup. He knows I can't answer that question.
Yeah.
There's a lot of wonderful candidates, I think. It's unfortunate that there's 11 people running. That much I'll say. I think that that's not good. That's not good for the office and the pursuit of what we're seeking to pursue. So, in democracy, it is good to have candidates and people and options available to citizens. And certainly this democracy and certainly the district attorney's office requires that. But there's also goals and purpose. We're not legislative analysts here. We shouldn't be promoting a particular social agenda. We should be promoting the law. Mm-hmm. The legislatures that we vote in should be promoting social agendas. So, to the extent that we have prosecutors who are willing to follow the law, that's a wonderful thing. To the extent we have some people who don't, then that's a tragedy. And that certainly is not the role of the prosecutor. The prosecutor's job is not to fix social ills. Our job is to right the wrong that did occur against the human being or against somebody. So it's like there are several very, very good candidates that I can't choose between, and I think it's a tragedy a little bit in the way it's going. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, I mean, but long story short, best of luck to all of them, basically.
No, not best of luck to all of them.
Yeah.
Best of luck to some of them.
Some of them.
Yeah,
but we can't disclose.
Can't disclose because, and the truth is, I will say that among several individuals, I have no opinion. I think that's an important thing. It's like there are several very good individuals who are running that I think that deserve support, and I wish there was only one. Right, and I cannot choose between them. Yeah. That's the truth.
Is that like a rule in the DA office? Like you're not allowed to disclose?
No.
Your opinion on this?
I mean, many DAs will. It's just in certain circumstances, like there was races between Garcetti and Cooley, for example. Right. Gil Garcetti ran, Cooley ran against him. There were clear lines drawn. There were Garcetti fans, there were Cooley fans. When Jackie Lacey ran, I was a young DA. And I strongly supported a guy by the name of Alan Jackson, who was an internal DA, who I'm still good friends with, who I think is amazing. He's now doing criminal defense as an enormously successful defense attorney, the best I've ever seen. Unfortunately, he went defense. He's making a ton of money. But I strongly and openly supported him. That's not an unknown thing that occurs. But, I was young. There's certain evaluations you have to take within the course of your career. I will say, Jackie never took revenge on anybody who supported a opposing candidate. She treated us all well. I had a great relationship with Jackie, and under her command, I thought she was wonderful. So yeah, that sometimes happens. It wasn't that I was opposed to Jackie. It was more us promoting Alan Jackson. But yeah, that certainly happens. There are people who take strong stands and are allowed to. We're protected by the First Amendment. We're allowed to do that. But sometimes you recognize also that in other circumstances, you're like, I still have ambitious goals within the office, and supporting one or the other would terminate those goals.
That makes sense.
I mean, sometimes you could put your eggs in one basket and go, and if you win, you're getting ahead. But if you lose, that's going to suck. So I'm too senior in my career to make a call on anybody. I'm just going to go support whoever wins.
Fair enough. Great answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, so now let's get into some of these anonymous questions that people submitted. The first one, what inspired you, because you're a professor at USC.
Yeah.
What inspired you to become an educator, and how do you balance your teaching responsibilities with, the DA legal practice?
Okay, so the first part is what inspired you. I think every lawyer is inspired to be a professor. So it's not like I had a specific inspiration that I was like, oh my God, I want. It is hard to get in. And it's a unique set of circumstances that led me to be able to get in. I don't think just based alone, if I just applied to USC with my resume, they would not even look at it. I think that's the case for 99% of us. It was a unique set of circumstances that led me to a unique spot that opened up the door. Longer story, maybe not for now. But I also always recognize that I love teaching, and I really, really do love teaching, and I recognize that that is one of my strengths without being too arrogant about it. I'm a good teacher, and I'm a good speaker, so good lecturer. So it was sort of something that drew me in, and then once you start teaching, if you care about it, it's incredibly rewarding. I've been teaching 9 years at USC. I've had multiple former students of mine become district attorneys in different places around the country. It's been awesome. Like, that's been amazing. I'm like a proud father every time I see one of my students do something amazing. And I have students, who are outperforming me in every which way at this point. And it's unbelievable, right? Like, I'm not in competition with my students or whatever. So it really is great. That is really a great moments to be able to do that. What keeps me inspired is that because I teach an area that is constantly evolving and changing, and I worked in that area for a long time, and I still desire to go back to cyber. That's my goal, is to go back to cyber. And I never wanted to leave. I was taken out, but it's that area of law. Just keeping up to date is phenomenal. I mean, the amount of tabs that I have open on my laptop right now, it's like 300 tabs of cases I have to read, right? Like, it's like I'm constantly pulling up cases, like daily. I pull up new cases from different jurisdictions that I get noticed on from various sources, whether it's a LexisNexis alert to professors on Twitter who post a new case in their jurisdiction. And I'll pull up those cases, and I'm like, some of them I'm skimming through like, this is junk, I don't need this. But some of them you're like, this is a really interesting case on whatever topic. And how can I incorporate this or not incorporate it, or how can I use this case? So that keeps me inspired. What was the second half of the question?
Yeah, the second half was how do you balance, being a professor and the DA?
Well, there's a lot of crossover, right? What I'm teaching essentially is a lot of Fourth Amendment stuff. And so I like writing a lot, and I like teaching a lot. And so I'll give you an example. One of my former, I don't want to say employee, but a younger DA worked under me, is now doing in the felony trial unit. And I happened to be, I was just checking in on her, how you doing? And she had a list of cases, things she had to do on her various cases. And I noticed she had a suppression motion, a Fourth Amendment motion. I was like, just give me the file. I'm going to write this motion for you. Well, what? Because I know it. Like, it's not going to be hard work, but there's a little bit of an issue I want to research. And so that's what it is. I mean, a lot of my teaching is Fourth Amendment law. Most of what I teach in cyber and privacy law is Fourth Amendment law. So that is within my job. It's the same thing. So when I'm reading for that, I'm reading for work, right? In that sense. So I don't think it's a hard balance. Initially, it is. When I was first prepping the course 12 years ago, my notes are like 400 pages long. Because as I was prepping the course, I had to write in notes of every single case that I was going to teach. I outlined, IRAC'd every single case. And I still do, by the way. I IRAC every single case. I might cut and paste a lot of like verbiage from the court, but I IRAC it just because it's a good way to like process it for me. And so I IRAC, I just have pages and pages of notes. And then if I read something anywhere, and I think it's apropos, I might cut and paste it, drop it into my documents, wherever. So I ended up compiling 400 pages of notes. And that was a lot of work to like ramp up and be able to teach that material. Fast forward 9 years, all those notes I know by heart, right? It's the new stuff that I have to work on. And that would be in the course of my job anyway, half the time. So I don't think there's a real transition. That's the truth. I used to lecture a lot when I was in cyber. I still regularly lecture. So between lecturing and prepping for work stuff and doing that, it all intertwines in one big pile of mush.
Yeah.
So it's not hard to transition.
I mean, it's amazing how you basically memorized all those, that information.
No, it's not. It's not. You do that for law school.
For?
9 years. Longer than you've been in law school, right? You know what I'm saying? It's like
Fair enough.
I actually am forgetting more than I remember. And that's the thing, is like when you're in law school, you're jamming in case material. No way. I was like trying to study to become a privacy professional, IAPP, the International Association of Privacy Professionals. It's like, let me get the certification. I know privacy. They have a little booklet you got to read. I got through 2 pages and I was like, I can't read this, right? It's so hard to study now. It's a different form. For me, it's much more this intellectual like base, and you just build upon it, as opposed to learning fresh and memorizing fresh. You guys have a harder job in law school than that. But I've been doing it long enough. I've taught 9 years every single semester for 9 years. Fall and spring and multiple summers. Not every summer, but multiple summers. So I've taught the course 20-something times. You're not the same material, but the same base material, yes.
I mean, okay, so it's like at that point it's less impressive, but
Yeah.
it's still
way
awesome.
less impressive. Yeah.
It's still great. Yeah, so next anonymous question. What are your views on criminal justice reform, and do you see any specific areas that need attention or improvement?
Oh man, that's a tightrope, right? Yeah. Who's watching this? Who's going to be watching?
I have no idea.
It's a really tough discussion, and it's a hard discussion because there's a lot of, very, very strong personalities on the topic. I would love to have a debate with some of the people on the reform side, but suffice to say, I'm not very pro-reform. One of the things is you have to look at and maybe I'll get criticized. No, not maybe, for sure. But the question is, you have to look at is like, okay, let's start with some baselines, right? Like, are there crimes in the penal code that you think shouldn't be crimes?
Personally, no.
Well, that's the first question. So you sit there and say you want to reform. Reform what? Like, reform the penal code? Okay, so let's look through it and find a crime that we should get rid of. And so and by the way, as part of that, I always hear these anecdotal stories. And I took this for many years. I've been doing this. I used to get much more on social media. Now social media has died out in many ways because it's just toxic to talk. But like, people used to tag me a lot on things, on criminal justice things. Benny, what do you think? And when I was on Facebook a lot. And like literally 100% of the time when there was a story that I read or that I saw or was tagged in that was too shocking to be true, it wasn't true. So you see these stories, like, you're sitting there going, this is outrageous. Like, and I'm like, okay, so let's back up for a second. I tell my students, I talk to my students, they're young adults, they're in their early 20s, and we talk about some of these issues, and I go, and they'll give me ideas, and whatever those ideas are. And I ask them, just like, let's look just from a basic common sense perspective. Forget law, forget anecdotes, just basic common sense. You're 19, 20, 21, 22 years old. Do you think that in your short life you have figured it out and I haven't thought about it? Like, and none of us have. Like the 1,000 prosecutors in LA, the 300 judges in LA, the 2,000 defense attorneys, 5,000 defense attorneys. Like, we never considered this. We're just sitting here going, oh my God, that's brilliant. We got to stop incarcerating people. You think you're the first person to think of that? So it's like, that's sort of like, you have your beginning point is like, whatever you thought, I've considered. In many, many ways, it's been considered, whether by me or others. And you think about those things. So you sit there, in my opinion, we sit there and go, okay, I see these anecdotal stories and they're outrageous. But if you look behind the story, I'll give you an interesting one that I found very interesting. And several senators posted this, and Congress people posted this. And I think it was out of New Orleans. And like, I remember Congresswoman Barbara Lee in California, she posted this, and I think that's where I saw it, but it was repeated by many people. Man got life in prison for selling a little bit of weed to feed his family in Louisiana. And I was like, if that's true, that's nuts, right? Like, I do not believe for a second that if you sell a little bit of weed, you should get life in prison. If you sell a little bit of weed, you shouldn't get incarcerated at all. You're sitting there going, that's crazy, right? We don't live in like a tyrannical sort of, like, that's nuts. We live in America. We live in a pretty advanced society with pretty, good exchange of ideas. I can't imagine that's true. So I said, okay, let me see this case. Like, because if that's true, that's a total miscarriage of justice. Life in prison for selling a little bit of weed. So I researched, and one of the things I researched was, I'm not going to read some news media story where someone's biased. I pulled up the appellate cases. I wrote the guy's name in, LexisNexis, and the appeals, and I found the case law. And you're like, oh no, the story's different. It was still a little bit of a miscarriage of justice, I'll give you that, but the story was different. The guy was what do you call it? I lost my words. He was selling women. He wasn't just a
man.
pimp.
He was a trafficker?
He was a human trafficker.
Oh, God.
And cops go undercover, okay? And he's a human trafficker. And the cop is like, he goes, yeah, I'll get you a girl, but like, do you want anything else? I can get you some drugs. And the cop's like, sure. And when he went in his wherever and he got some weed and he sold weed, they arrested him on that. Okay. So, and he had a bunch of prior criminal history. And so under Louisiana law, he was being prosecuted as a career criminal, akin to 3 strikes. We don't have that kind of 3 strikes here. But it wasn't some poor man selling some weed to feed his family. Like, that just is not. You could have told the same story because said, man got life in prison for selling a little bit of weed, despite having an incredibly bad criminal history and being a human trafficker. It's still outrageous. Agreed, right? If you present it as true. Like me say, at the end of the day, what he was charged and convicted was selling some weed. I don't think a guy deserves life in prison for that. But to misrepresent that it was this poor guy and he's a victim of this circumstance, you're wrong. Like, maybe the law needs to be changed, but the law is not inappropriate in the circumstance. He's not a good person. So, you know, those are the kind of things that happen. You sit there and go, well, when you talk about criminal justice reform, let's get behind that. What are you talking about exactly? Do the laws need to be changed? Do the prosecutors need to be changed? Do we have a lack of insight into the case? And if so, tell me how. Show me those cases where we prosecute. You know, everybody goes, I know a person who went to prison for life for stealing some milk to feed their children. That's objectively not true. Find me the case. Okay? Now, are there miscarriages of justice? 100%. By the way, miscarriages of justice are incredible in terms of the victims being miscarriages of justice. Either the case not being filed, the defendant being found not guilty. And again, that might be the rightful way, and they're rightfully so, but the victim feels left out. Or even the case not being. I've been called all sorts of names by victims who didn't think we were going hard enough. And they could be right. Like, I didn't take that offensively. Like, they could be right. We're limited sometimes by law. So, like, I recently gave a guy 7 years for great embezzlement, and the victim of the embezzlement was furious at me. I was like, but I can't get more. Like, it's 10 years. This is max. Like, so you're right. That's the legislature's issue. There's nothing I can do for you, right? Anyway, so that's a bit of a rant all over the place. But the point is that it's lacking in definition. They go criminal justice reform. What does that mean? How do you mean that? One of the concerns I have for a lot of parts of our society is that we look at the wrong end to reform something. So, for example, you're going, we don't like that people are getting incarcerated, so prosecutors stop incarcerating people. You're like, should I not incarcerate rapists or child molesters or murderers? Like, which one should I not incarcerate? You know, the issue doesn't begin with me. If you stop me, it's just a Band-Aid. It begins long before. If you want to change social values, social norms, incarceration stats, start at the beginning. Let's raise generations of people in better ways instead of going, well, they already did X, therefore let's stop it here. You're looking at the wrong end. So that's part of also the problem. But it's a huge discussion. There's many areas of it. Yeah. Like I do challenge in class, I do challenge my students on the subject of like, what do you think people are incarcerated for in society? And then I'll show them the actual statistics. You can look, there's federal statistics out there of all incarceration rates, and you'll see that 70% of people in state prisons in the United States are there for violent crimes. People don't know that. 70% are there for violent crimes. The most incarcerated crime in the United States, statistically, but not by numbers, in all the states, if you take all the states combined, the most incarcerated crime, that is the people who are in custody for whatever crime, is for murder. There's more people in for murder than for anything else. I think we all agree people should be incarcerated for murder. Are there exceptions? Of course. Some murderers shouldn't be incarcerated, maybe. But certainly we agree as a general principle, murderers should be incarcerated. So there's a lot to this. Sorry, that was a long ramble.
No, it was great. I mean, also, that Louisiana case that you were talking about, isn't that similar to how they got Al Capone? Because it's like, I remember hearing about.
Well, I don't know. You're right. So they get Al Capone Al Capone's a murderer and a gangster and does horrific acts, and they get him on tax evasion. I don't know that this was a specific target that they were trying to find anything and therefore to incarcerate him. Maybe it was that wasn't in the appellate opinion. Could be, but I mean, it's not a bad theory. Sometimes we talk about like over incarceration. So a person got incarcerated for X, and I go, why on this lower level crime? Like, I have a person I was just prosecuting last week or supervising, but it's not my case forever. But like they wanted an offer on the case. and he got out. He was he did a vicious rape and got like 15 years, and then he molested a child and got a bunch of years, and now he's failed to register as a sex offender. Okay, multiple times, and he failed to register. They gave him a citation. Like, he was arrested, cited, and said, go to court, or register a sex offender. He just kept ignoring it. It's not a violent crime. No one was harmed if you fail to register as a sex offender, right? It's just like it's a failure to do something. It's not an affirmative act. It's a negative. So what do you do with that guy? Well, some people might go, well, someone doesn't register, as a sex offender shouldn't be incarcerated. You go, well, context matters. What did he do? Right? Like, yeah, I want to lock up the child molester rapist. Yeah. On anything.
Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, let's just move to this next anonymous question. What are some unique challenges you face in the cybercrime unit?
I'm no longer in the cybercrime unit.
But when you were there,
when I was there, one of the unique issues, challenges that you do face a lot of times with cyber is victim reporting. It's a huge problem. Corporation reporting is a huge problem. So we do have mandated reporting laws, but I don't think they're followed very well. That's one of the big issues, because it's really bad business to tell your clients we got hacked. No one's happy about that. And other businesses who all themselves get hacked, but they'll say, look at us, we're secure, And so that's kind of the business model today. And so everybody's getting hacked in some way or another, or there's absolute world wars going on in on the cyberverse. There are world wars, like literally world wars, where you have foreign governments trying to get into businesses on a daily basis, and businesses with their team fighting back. These are, I'm not joking, these are like wars in the cyberverse. But they don't want to report, or they don't want to prosecute. They'd rather eat the loss than prosecute the case because they don't want media attention to it. So that's one of the major issues that I saw a lot in cyber. The other issues that you have is sometimes the complexity of schemes. A lot of cases can spiral very, 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 and it's one of the things that I try to very much focus on is focus on the core, drop off the chaff on the sides. I mean, say there was a lot of people involved in a lot of crimes. I wouldn't prosecute. Just focus in. You start prosecuting all the little players around the edges, and maybe they're bigger players, but I don't have evidence of it. You just get unwieldy and out of control. You have to kind of focus it in. The third thing is on cyber is that we're still in a society that doesn't recognize the severity of it. And so it's still considered, in our terms that we use for criminal justice reform, it's considered nonviolent crimes. Right? Everybody, when they talk about criminal justice reform, they always talk about bail should only be for, there shouldn't be bail. Bail's wrong. It discriminates. Only violent criminals should be held. Right? And you're like, well, no, I disagree with that. There are violent criminals who are rehabilitatable and white-collar criminals who are not rehabilitatable. What is the crime? What is the impact? But a white-collar criminal, like cyber criminal, doesn't physically harm anybody. So, they could. There are some, but most of the time you're not physically harming anybody. And so you're just sitting there going, well, we shouldn't prosecute them, or we should have lower sentencing. So we've reduced a lot of sentences on white-collar related offenses, or I shouldn't say white-collar, on non-violent offenses. And so you've taken away tools from prosecutors to hold people accountable. That's a huge problem in cyber. It's so hard to incarcerate someone on a cyber case, and despite doing horrific things. So those are the three major things, I think, in cyber.
Yeah, I mean, it seems crazy. I mean, especially because it's like, I mean, compared to like all other crimes, it's probably extremely new compared to
it's
else.
New, but also we've taken on this agenda of. There are new, and there's a lot of things. For example, it's been years now, I don't know, 6-7 years. I wrote a petition or proposal to introduce new legislation to protect deepfakes. You know deepfakes, where they put some...
Yeah.
And it was new. I wrote a whole article about it. Got published. I have a published article about the issues affecting deepfakes and citations. And the legislature doesn't want to add new crimes to the books under this guise of criminal justice reform. So you sit there and go, okay, they don't want to add a new crime that is new. It doesn't exist. So how do we can we prosecute under like identity theft or something like that? Is it possible to prosecute some of those cases?
I feel like in some cases it can be used for defamation.
Well, that's not a crime.
That is true.
Right? So criminal versus civil action. Sure, you can you can sue for civil, but criminal action, and where it gets serious is, it's one thing to make a joke about somebody, and that's satirical. It's protected by the First Amendment. It's another thing to greatly impact the business. Like, and where I got into deepfakes was actually Secret Service came to me because I had a relationship with them. And they came to me and asked me to look into it because studios were concerned about deepfakes. Now, I haven't seen any deepfake that derailed a movie, but there could be, right? You can have a deepfake where you have, Will Smith slapping Chris Rock across the face during the Oscars. That's a deepfake. And all of a sudden his career is derailed or movies are derailed, right? That's a joke. It wasn't a deepfake. It was real. But the point is if you had a deepfake like that, you would derail somebody or some movie that's being released, and that could cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Forget the political deepfakes, right? If you deepfake someone doing something politically outrageous right before an election. So there are areas where you can, greatly impact somebody on these sort of cybercrimes that are new, and yet we don't have laws to protect, right? You might have civil laws, but that's going to take too long. Criminal is much more impactful in those moments.
Yeah. It is insane. So yeah, this last anonymous question, as a veteran DA, like district attorney, this person's asking if you can like share some insights for young attorneys in developing prosecution strategies. Like, how does your approach work?
I mean, young attorneys who want to go into prosecution, or just young attorneys in their career?
I guess young attorneys that want to go into prosecution.
I mean, going into prosecution, first of all,
The way the question is phrased.
What's really unique about prosecution, I like to say, it's actually really unique in the sense that if you want to do what I do, there's one corporation in the entire county that does it, right? So if you want to be a felony prosecutor, there's one place you can go. That's it. I can't switch jobs. I can switch jobs by moving out. But it's like other businesses, if you're working in a civil law firm doing slip and fall, there's 1,000 of those, right? You lose a job here, you quit, you resign, you get fired, you can find a job here. You lose your job in whatever area of law, wills and trusts, you can open your own firm. I can't. There's no firm I can open, right? I can't go and become a private prosecutor. That doesn't exist. You can't open a firm. You can't switch careers within your place that you live. Like, you understand? Like, I could switch to becoming a defense attorney and open my own firm, but doing what I do, you can't. So it's a very exclusive job, which is kind of unique. In order to be a prosecutor, you want to learn how to be a prosecutor, you have to be a prosecutor. Now, there are other agencies that do other types of prosecutions, city attorney's office or the attorney general's, but generally speaking, this holds true for anywhere. The district attorney in any district is the chief prosecutor for felonies in that district. And that's the only place you can go if you want to do that job. So that's number one. You got to get a job in that place. And sometimes it's very hard to get a job. My year, there was thousands of applicants for 100 spots. And I don't know how I was lucky to get in, by the way. Thank God I got in. But in some years, in recent years in the LADA's office, we've had very, very, very few applicants. It's much easier to get in, and I would encourage people. Now, people want to make, you also have to have some form of idealism. If your goal is to make money, wrong place. You're not going to make money. If your goal is to do it for a year and leave, that's also a bad idea, especially in a place like LA. It just, it takes many years to get to the skill. And also to really, it really should be a job where you desire to that area. But I would say as a young prosecutor in LA, which is wonderful, because we have such a career-oriented county, historically speaking, you have a lot of prosecutors who've been around a long time. I'm a prosecutor for 18 years. I'm not unique. If I was in New York, I'd be hugely unique. 18 years in the DA's office in Brooklyn, that's unheard of. People come in for a few years and leave. In LA, it's very common. My class that I was hired with, my year, 2006 hiring year of, 100 people, I would say there's still 80 of us left in the office, give or take a few. I mean, 18 years later, we're all still here. So that's the kind of job it is. So you have a lot of people who have knowledge that could be passed down. And it's not knowledge that we keep to ourselves because we're in competition. I'm not competing with a new DA. Whereas in a civil firm, right, you want to keep that information to yourself or those clients to yourself or whatever it is. We don't have problem sharing. So the first thing I would say is obviously get the job. The second thing I would say is be eager to learn. There's a lot of people to learn from. Ask them questions. Be outgoing amongst them. If you're isolated and you stick to your own little crew of people you got hired with and that's where you bounce ideas off, that's okay, but you're going to miss a lot of things. You're going to miss a lot of skill sets. You're going to miss a lot of ideas. And so it's be open to that and be open to trying anything. When I was in law school, one of the things I did unintentionally and then it became an intentional thing was to experience everything I could. So my first summer, I worked for a state judge, a clerk for a state judge. And anytime there was a different proceeding going on in the courthouse that I heard about, I would run and go see it, whatever it was. And same thing, I worked for a federal judge. I did the same thing, even the DA's office. I regularly take my computer and I'll go into a trial and watch a trial. Some other DA trial, younger, older, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what kind of case. I'll go and watch trials and do work in the back of the courtroom on my laptop while watching a trial, because you can do, you can multitask like that in different moments. But you see different events, different occurrences, and you learn from those occurrences. And I think that's really important for young DAs, is to learn from those different occurrences, learn different tactics, learn different techniques of doing things. One of my really wonderful, amazing, great younger DAs, she was doing, she's only done 5-6 felony trials now, but she's knocked them out one after another in the past few months. But her first trial, we sat down and I said, let's just work through it, right? And she's like working through it, and she goes, okay, this is why I came up for jury selection. I was like, okay, fantastic. Now let's take it to the major leagues. What he came up with was great. It's college level baseball, no question. But let's take it to the major leagues. Let me tell you how each of your questions I can formulate and do a follow-up or make it more complex and get you better results as a result of that. Those things happen, right? And she was like, oh my God, let's follow through this, change the way you see things or ask things, the way you approach things. There are DAs like that I say most people follow cases very linearly. As a lawyer, it's going to be the case if you're a litigator in any way. You have a case, incident happens to this, to this, to this, to this, right? Like it's a linear case, A equal to B to C to D to et cetera. There are better lawyers will see cases in 3D, right? And you sometimes see that if we do an example to a movie, right? Sometimes you see a movie like a Quentin Tarantino movie and it's shot out of order. You're like, what's the point of shooting it out of order? But then you realize the genius of the way the movie's organized, even though it's not chronological, right? And sometimes there's cases like that. Some cases just lend itself. It's like, I was at a bus stop, I got robbed by that guy. I mean, there's nothing more you can do. But there's a lot of cases, if you see in a 3D modeling, you kind of can see it differently. That's the only way I can describe it. And then there's some DAs, very few, who see things in 4D, right? They can smell and taste and touch and see and experience the entire thing. And their abilities are remarkable. I have a good friend who, he's very innocuous in trial. He doesn't stand out. He's certainly competent. You can tell that that's the case. He doesn't stand out, but he's asking every question that you couldn't even I would have never even figured out to ask. And it's setting up for everything else. And when he comes into closing arguments, he's like, here's what I put together. And you're like, holy crap, right? You don't even see it happening. I've seen him do this multiple times. It's just amazing. There are guys like that who can so understand how a case should be formulated and thought about and organized and drawn out and questions asked, that they're working on a different level. So speaking to all those different types of people, that's basically what it comes down to. Experiencing things, taking on as many cases as you can, going through the system, talking to senior people. And I will say the most important thing, having integrity is so important. Being honest and having integrity. There are no games played. The game is played within the system. Like I've had this discussion with defense attorneys, like you can talk whatever bullshit you want in front of the jury. That's your game. But like between me and you, don't treat me like a fool. I won't treat you like a fool. Right. Like, right. Talk. We know what's going on. From my side, there shouldn't be games. There's no games. I'm not playing games. I'm not hiding ball. I'm not tricking you. I'm not doing anything. I'm giving you everything I know. I've sat down with defense attorneys and gone, this is literally how I'm going to prosecute the case. This is literally my theory on how I'm going to prosecute the case. Now, you don't have to go that far, but there are times that it's necessary, whatever those times are. If you're on the prosecution side, integrity, honesty is paramount. Don't play games. If you have a perspective that's harsher than others, keep that perspective, right? Meaning some people, obviously there's humanity involved. Some people think that some cases should be more incarcerated or less. And then that's sometimes a subjective approach. Stick to it, but be honest about it, right? I think that's the most important thing. Dishonesty, if I ever caught one, would be gone so fast. I have no patience for that.
Yeah, and it's actually kind of fitting that the last anonymous question was an advice kind of question, because the way the show works is the first question always comes from me, and the last question always comes from me. And that last question is always, if you had to give one piece of advice to the people watching at home,
right?
What would you say?
To lawyers watching at home or non-lawyers?
Anybody, anyone.
That makes it much more tougher.
It makes it broader. Yeah.
I mean, it's so cliche to say, but I think it is one of the beautiful things. This is a little side note. One of the beautiful things I think the DA's office did for me personally. but I think for many people is there's many benefits to it. One of the things is I don't have to network, right? I love that. There's no need for me to network. I don't need anybody's business, and no one wants my business, right? So when I go to events or functions or whatever it is, it's really like there's no pressure for me to buy or sell, right? I'm just want to have a relationship or not with somebody, or to engage with somebody or talk to somebody or help somebody out or not. That is a huge part of being a DA, I think. The other thing about being a DA is that I love is that my goal is honesty every day. I don't have to remember what I said yesterday because I'm always telling the truth. I know that. I'm not trying to manipulate anything. Sometimes there's misunderstandings for sure, but like I'm trying to get across the truthful right thing. I'm not trying to manipulate or cheat or lie or hide or whatever. So that's a good lesson in life, right? Meaning say, I just want a relationship for relationship's sake. And I think being an honest, decent person is a blessing in itself. Some people don't want to be that. And I don't mean criminally dishonest. I mean, some people don't want to be that. They want to be much more aggressive or litigated. That's fine. But I think that's brought me a lot of great blessings. And so part of that is having a good amount of altruism. The DA's office is a job. It's not designed to make money. The better I do in a case doesn't matter. I'll still get paid the same. I've brought in millions of dollars of restitution to victims. Literally, I have a $5.5 million restitution order that I brought in. I get zero. I don't get a commission. That's not the goal of it, right? The goal is just to help somebody out. And in fact, if they wanted to give me as a gift, I couldn't take it. And nor should we be allowed to. It's not the design. It's not designed that way. We're designed to be honest and appropriate. And that's a good thing. When I started being a DA very early on, I realized that it's not just a job, it's all encompassing. And part of that all encompassing nature of being a DA was that my job was to help people in society. And that meant in my professional life and in my personal life. Well, no one's paying you to help them out in professional. So what? That might, because I have a job. I'm not trying to get your business, but if you need my assistance, I've always tried to, historically, less so recently. But that was kind of what led me into fighting sexual abuse in the community, in my community and things like that. And I never got paid a penny for it, never took a penny for it. It was really altruistic. It was like, there are people who need help and I can help them out. Now, as you start getting older and a little more jaded and work and life and, teaching and kids and all that, you can't help everybody out, right? It's impossible for me to respond to every call I get or to every email I get. And unfortunately I get too many. And a lot of them I just can't. There's nothing I can do. I have limited power. I can't just file a case just because you want me to file a case. But I think that's really the important thing. To wrap it up is that my job at USC, I got that because I was altruistic. I got that because I helped several people out with absolutely no expectation of a return. It was just people asked me for a favor, I helped out. And that led to one thing, led to another. And same thing in my job. I think that just being a kind person, helping people out, helping anywhere you can is a very important factor. And so that's what it is. It's I think that really goes far in life. That, I don't know, is it a better legacy than money? I'll leave the viewer with that. What's better, having a legacy of helping people out or making money? Anyway, we'll leave it. But
yeah, we'll leave it there. Benny, thank you so much for coming
pleasure.
on. I appreciate it so much. If you guys like this episode, make sure to like and subscribe. If you guys want to keep up with the show, figure out what's going on, who's coming on next, follow all the socials. Links are going to be down below. If you want to see what Benny's got going on, I'll add his links down below as well. And on that note, this has been Benny Forer. My name is Eden Toronto. This has been the US We Podcast, and I'll see you guys next week.
Yup.